Hey man, I hear you got some good stuff.
Yo, you're not with the FDA, are you?
No,
All right, what you need? You type 2 or you type 1?
I'm a type 1.
All right, what you want? I got insulin, I got GLP-1s, I got SGLT2s. What do you want?
I don't really know.
Check this, man. These GLP-1s, they can help lower your blood sugar and even lose some weight. Damn!
Whoa. Tell me more about the SGLT.
SGLT2 inhibitors, man. These are the hottest pills on the market. You take this, you'll be peeing that sugar out in no time, bro.
What else you got?
What else I got? I got the new rapid-acting insulins. Fiasp, Lumjev, Afrezza. I got long-acting basals. One shot a day, bro.
I can't believe how many options there are for people with type 1 diabetes. Are all those approved by the FDA?
Approved by the FDA. Why do you think you're here, bro? Anyways, what's it gonna be?
I'm going to go for the oral SGLT2 on top of my insulin.
Good choice, man. Let me just hit me up with that insurance card.
Insurance card?
Yeah, I gotta run your copay, bro. Come on.
Oh man, I'm out of here.
Good luck getting this filled at CVS, bro.
Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about drugs, the prescribed kind, and what we could use in addition to insulin. I tell people all the time, I've been a drug addict since I was 15. I'm addicted to drugs and I can't live without them. I crave them. I take them every day. They've even got me in trouble in the emergency room. Yeah, it's called insulin. And so I'm going to talk about some of the newest ideas of treating people with type 1 with medications other than insulin. Now, as a background, everyone always shows these slides in doctor talks. It's a kid before they discovered insulin. Look at him. He's skinny, he's scrawny, and it was a bad ending for these kids before they discovered insulin. And these are the four gentlemen that got the Nobel Prize in 1923 for the discovery of insulin. I tell you their names, there's no way you would remember them, so I'm going to go on. This is Ted Ryder, one of the first kids ever to receive insulin. You can see he's 5 years old, 1923. He's skinny, he's scrawny, and he's not very happy. And if I had to wear that outfit, I don't think I'd be that happy either. Now, here he is, 5 months after starting insulin. And I think a picture says 1,000 words. And to this day, insulin remains one of the greatest medical discoveries of all time. And believe it or not, Ted Ryder lived to the age of 75 in an era where they didn't have all the fancy insulins, continuous glucose monitors, insulin pens, insulin pumps. He had a good partner. Now, if you think that's his wife, think wrong. That's his mom. So he obviously came from good genes, but she took care of him. And so it goes to show that even if you don't have access to the latest and greatest, you still can have good control and live a long and healthy life. Now, who knows how long he would have lived if he didn't even develop diabetes at the age of 5. Now, just not that I'm comparing myself to Ted Ryder, but that's me. I was diagnosed with type 1. You can see I'm a camp counselor in the middle, where there I am. I'm not Spanky 00. So I got it in 1970, and that's a little over 50 years ago. And I want to tell you that when I was diagnosed, it was 48 years after the discovery of insulin. You know what was available to me 48 years later? Insulin and urine testing. Exactly what Ted Ryder was taking 48 years before. So it's been slow going to develop stuff for people with type 1 diabetes. Now you look at those folks with type 2 diabetes, they're spoiled SOBs. Look at that. Sulfonylureas, metformin, TZDs, alpha glucosidase inhibitors, DPP4s, GLP-1 receptor agonists, SGLT2 inhibitors, pramlintide. Oh my gosh, they've got it all. And what do we got? We got insulin in 1922, 23. Then there's nothing, 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 nothing. And then you come all the way up to 2005, and the first medication for the officially approved for people with type 1 is called pramlintide, also Symlin, a medication that I'm going to talk a little bit at the end, like a tiny bit, because in its current format, it hasn't been that usable, and I think it's hardly used at all. It's not marketed, um, but I have some exciting things to tell you about that later. And so, if you think about it, these two are injectables too. And so a lot of people are saying, come on, man, it's been 100 years since the discovery of insulin. Shouldn't we be coming up with some new stuff? And so, you know, if there was something new, I might consider taking it on top of my insulin. Now, remember, everything is on top of insulin. Nothing replaces insulin. I'm going to show you medications that may reduce the need for the same dose of insulin, but let's just get into it. So when you look at other treatments for type 1, there's pros and cons. So what's the pros? You improve your time and range, and I hope you guys know what time and range is, the percent of time between 70 and 180, which means that you're fluctuating less, you're having less highs and less lows. Dropping your A1C, get some weight loss for those of us type 1s that have gained weight through the years. Use less insulin. That may not be that important, but it does indicate that the body is utilizing the nutrients we eat in a different manner, that you don't need as much insulin. So it's kind of a signal that your metabolic machinery may be working better and possibly less hypoglycemia. What's the downside? Well, you still need insulin. You can't replace that with anything else. One more thing to think about, one more medication on your list and to fight CVS pharmacy for. Additional side effects of every drug, and some are tolerable, some aren't. And remember, every medication I show you today, other than the Symlin, is not FDA approved, but a lot of type 1s are using it. And I've been prescribing it for folks with type 1. They clearly know it's a quote unquote off-label approach. They typically approach me. And so hopefully you can learn a little bit about some of these medications. Okay. I say a picture says 1,000 words. Well, this is one picture of a download of a patient of mine overlapped several days. And you can see unpredictable glucose levels from 40 to 400. And I tell people that don't know what living with type 1 diabetes is like, I say, this is it. Now, this is a doctor slide, but you guys are smart. You can see the fluctuations on the patient on the top level and the bottom level. Which patient would you rather be? Bouncing all over the place or just minimal bounce around an average? Well, obviously we want less variation, that lower chart. And it's important to know that both those patients had the same exact A1C, which is why time and range is so important. You've seen this chart many times. And it really is one of the most important measurements on how we determine how you're doing. So time and range is the percent of time that your blood sugars are between 70 and 180. We're very concerned if time below range is too high. And of course, the rest is time above range. So the goal for all of you folks is to have your time and range at 70% or above. Now, can you get your time and range if you're not wearing a CGM? No. You can't. If you test your blood sugars a lot, your glucose meter software may give you that data, but it's not based on a blood sugar every 5 minutes for 24 hours for 3 months. It's based on whenever you prick your finger. Now, I realize there's a lot of reasons why people don't have a continuous glucose monitor, but it's the single most important advance for people with type 1 diabetes since the discovery of insulin. So whatever you can do to fight the system, get support, beg, borrow, steal, to get a CGM, it's going to make a positive difference in your control. Now, if you told me your time and range was 90% and you're not having any lows or not too many highs, I would say you don't need a CGM. But on the other hand, I'd say I've never seen anybody like that. If you told me, I wouldn't believe you. Okay, let's go on. Let's talk about these two new classes of medications. I'm going to spend most of my time on these two agents. The first one is called the GLP-1 receptor agonists. The other group of medications is called the SGLT2 inhibitors. And remember, these are currently approved for people with type 2, but not currently approved for people with type 1 diabetes. So let's talk about GLP-1s first. The key is that the reason why they're so impactful in type 2 diabetes, because they've also been shown to reduce heart attacks and strokes. And of course, it lowers the A1C and weight, and we'll talk about that. And a lot of people have asked, do you think these benefits will be there for people with type 1, lower heart attacks and strokes? And a lot of experts, based on the mechanism of these drugs, say yes. But the long-term studies have not been done yet. Okay, so how do they work? Well, the first thing is the GLP-1 is secreted upon the ingestion of food. This is the normal GLP-1 in someone that does not have diabetes. GLP-1 goes into the circulation. It stimulates the pancreas to secrete more insulin. It also suppresses glucagon, which will raise your blood sugar. Then if you go to the bottom right, it controls the peristaltic motion of the stomach. The nutrients from the food you eat go into the bloodstream slower. So what's the end effect of that? Your post-meal blood sugar will not rise as quickly and prevents your liver from producing glucose inappropriately. And lastly, on the upper right, it induces satiety and reduces your appetite. And in every single GLP-1 study done, people lose a statistically significant amount of weight. And it turns out that if you look at the type 1 diabetes in our nation based on the T1D exchange data, that we are getting heavier. And as type 1s get heavier, we develop cardiovascular risk factors. So some of us don't need to lose weight, and some of us do. And these drugs kind of have a lipostat. If you're thin and you take these drugs, you don't lose any weight. If you're heavy and you take these drugs, you lose more weight. So they're very smart. And remember, these drugs I'm going to tell you, their exact names, they mimic the GLP-1 that a normal individual secretes. So here are all the different GLP-1 receptor agonists. We've come a long way since the first one in 2005, Byetta. You had to take it twice a day. Then came Victoza, which is just once a day. And now we have Bydureon, Trulicity, Ozempic, all once a week. They're all injectables. And then Novo Nordisk developed technology to take this injectable agent and make it into a pill. It's called Rybelsus. Now, I can tell you that most of the experience I have and other folks have are with GLP-1s and type 1s is with Victoza, because Victoza, you can titrate the dose very, very slowly at a low level. The main side effect of GLP-1s is nausea. And we know that the lower dose you start and the slower you titrate, the more tolerated it is. And the Victoza pen is very easy to titrate. And us type 1s, we're used to shots. Once a day is not a big deal for us. But in reality, any of these could work. So you can see that it lowers the A1C levels, improves time and range, leads to weight loss, does not cause hypoglycemia in and of itself. Of course, if you take it and you eat less, you might have too much insulin on board, for example, and get a hypo from that. But Victoza itself does not cause hypo because it doesn't work to stimulate the pancreas to secrete more insulin or physiologic excess amounts of insulin. And we don't know for sure, but we think it protects your heart in terms of reducing heart attacks and strokes. Okay. Now, you say these GLP-1 drugs are made for type 2s. Well, they work for me, and that's someone with type 1 diabetes in the lower corner. So I want to show you data from a recent study. The reference is on the bottom. After 6 months of Victoza in people with type 1 diabetes compared to the group that got placebo, fake solution, they dropped their A1C 0.3%. Now, I know what you're saying. That's it? That's all you got? Well, it turns out that it's tough to do studies in type 1, and the baseline A1C from these patients wasn't that high. It's like 7.6%. So here's the example. They went from 7.6 to 7.3. But here's the thing that the FDA doesn't realize. There's more to life than just the A1C. We'll talk about that, which is time and range. Well, their basal insulin dose dropped 13 units per day. So, for example, a typical dose would be 20 units of a basal insulin, and it went down to 7 units. A pretty big drop in basal. What about drops in prandial insulin? And it dropped on average 11.5 units per day between all the correction doses and mealtime doses. So if you were taking about 22 units a day of fast-acting insulin divided between meals and correction, you would now be on 10.5. Now, once again, reducing your insulin dose to me is in and of itself not the biggest deal in the world. Okay, you take a little less insulin, but you still have to control your blood sugar, work on your time and range. But it is an indication that there are other metabolic machinery mechanisms going on in place so that you don't need as much what we call exogenous insulin. Exogenous means the type you inject. Okay, what about weight? You know, as I told you, us type 1s, we're getting chunky. That's why I got a little spanky on today so that you don't see it. The average weight loss was 10 pounds. So if you weighed 165, you can get down to 155. Now remember, these are the average. Some people lost more, some people lost less. And I think a picture says 1,000 words again. You can see the CGM download on the left before these patients entered the study. And then you can see it on the right. And I don't have to tell you that you have less highs, less lows. Time and range was statistically significantly better. Now, what about another study where they gave it to people who are on insulin pumps, type 1s? And you see what I underlined there in red? Obese type 1s. Now, the official definition of obese is having a BMI, body mass index, over 30. So you're getting pretty chunky. Remember, the level below that is overweight. So we have overweight, BMI of 25 to 30, and then over 30, obese. So you can see the data that A1C dropped 0.6% in the people on liraglutide, the pump, minus 0.2% in the people just on pumps. The weight loss was not too shabby, 15.7 pounds, and only 1.4 pounds with the people on pumps alone. And the time in range was 57% compared to 45. Now, this is an older study, and I don't think I'd be bragging about 57% time in range, but at least you can compare. Now, let me just say one thing about the weight. These drugs now, the GLP-1s, are now being used in higher doses for people who need to lose weight. And so Victoza now is in the higher doses is called Saxenda, Saxenda, and I know Trulicity, which is another GLP-1, they have higher dosing available. They get more weight loss, and Ozempic also is going to come out with a much higher dose and get the official indication for weight loss. In this particular study, there was no difference in insulin doses or hypoglycemia. And there was quite a bit of insulin dose reduction in the first study. But remember, every study is different, protocol is different, patient subjects are different age, duration of diabetes, etc. So what about GLP-1 drugs have any other benefits? Well, we talked about this in type 2s. They reduce heart attacks and strokes consistently from the different GLP-1s, all of them pretty much reduce cardiovascular disease, and that's huge. You know what the number one reason for passing away if you have type 2 diabetes? Cardiovascular disease. You know what the number one reason for passing away if you have type 1 diabetes? It's not eye disease, it's not kidney disease, it's not nerve disease, it's heart disease. Now, once again, these drugs, such as the GLP-1s, have not been proven to reduce heart disease in people with type 1. Just haven't done the studies yet. And remember that when you do these large studies to look at heart disease over time, you need lots of people to get the most accurate results. And there's just not that many type 1s around compared to type 2s. So it sounds great. Are you one of those scaredy cats afraid to try anything new? What are the side effects of GLP-1? Okay, well, let's talk about them. I think the first one is the most common clinically relevant side effect. They're actually pretty well tolerated. It's nausea. That's why we start with a low dose and we titrate up slowly according to your symptoms. And every GLP-1 is a little bit different. They have a different titration schedule, but with people with type 1, it's start low and go slow. And I can tell you the majority of people do not have nausea. And I started a patient recently on one of the GLP-1s, and she said, well, what do I do if I get nausea? And I said, well, most of the time we don't need to do anything, but if you can grin and bear it, the side effects, the nausea goes down over time the first month. If it's so severe, we'll stop it and we'll try a different one. But I can tell you, it's a rare patient where you have to stop it. And the nausea is not the reason for weight loss. Now, what about thyroid medullary carcinoma? Yeah, if you're a rat and I give you 40 times the maximum dose, you might get one of these really rare thyroid cancers. So it's on the package insert, meaning that there is a warning. And so I've never seen a patient. I've never heard of a patient. I've never heard a lecture from anybody that talked about it, but it still is in the package insert on all the GLP-1s since 2005. So I wouldn't worry about it. Do not take it if you have a history of pancreatitis. Pancreatitis is inflammation of the pancreas, and these drugs have been associated with that. There's been no what we call direct cause and effect relationship. So they really do not, in my mind, there's an association. That's a big difference than actual causing it. But if you've had a bunch of episodes of pancreatitis, just good to stay away. And by the way, you're going to be talking to your doctor about this. Don't just trust me, and don't go out. Well, luckily, you need a prescription. If you didn't, I'm sure many of you would try to get it right now on your own. That's not good. Got to talk to your doctor. So let's talk about SGLT2 inhibitors, sodium glucose transporter 2 inhibitor. They help the heart and the kidney in a different way than the GLP-1s. They have been shown to reduce congestive heart failure, one of the most common cardiac issues in type 2 diabetes, and progression of kidney disease. This is where it may become important for people with type 1 as well. There's a picture of all 4 of the bottles, and I hope you like my little cartoons. Got those from Tricia Santos. And there's 4 of them now. Farxiga, Invokana, Jardiance, Steglatro. Believe it or not, they're fairly similar. Little differences here and there. And of course, the doses are different because they're made from different formulations. And a big plus for a lot of people, especially folks with type 2, is you don't have to inject it. Now, the other ones, remember, they were once a week, and they had the oral one, Rybelsus. SGLT2 inhibitors, they're all once a day. That's it, once a day. How do they work? Well, I can get into the scientific nature of it, but I'm not. They help you pee out excess glucose in your urine. And you see the sugar cubes in that guy's hand? That's about how much is peed out in one day in a typical patient. So that's not only calories, but it also, so people lose weight, and it also lowers the A1C. But there's lots of other benefits that I'm going to get to. So it's a different mechanism than GLP-1s, but it's a very unique mechanism, and it works. It works extremely well. Okay, so let's talk about the benefits. Lowers A1C. Okay, that's important. Very importantly, time and range. Now, in the clinical studies, the A1C didn't come down too much more than it did for the Victoza studies, but the time and range improved. And the FDA at the time did not quite acknowledge the importance of this new way we describe glucose control, which is time and range. It's relatively new. Led to weight loss, improved blood pressure, which is key, and just like the GLP-1s, does not cause hypoglycemia. Now, if these lower your glucose levels because you're peeing out the sugar, then you might be on too much insulin after that. So a lot of times we will proactively reduce the insulin by 10% when you start one of these medications. And does it protect your heart? Does it reduce congestive heart failure? Does it protect your kidneys? Well, we know for sure in type 2s. We do not know for sure in type 1s. So just remember that. I don't, I've overemphasized that during the lecture on purpose. And these are not FDA approved medications. Okay, there's a before and after in one of the clinical studies. Now you might say this doesn't look as clean as neat after as the before and after GLP-1 Victoza studies I showed you, but this is a big difference. So what this shows is that there was up to 4 hours a day where you improved your time and range in the clinical trials. And that's the metric that I think the investigators were measuring and was hoping would make a big impact. So there have been 3 of the SGLT2 companies gone to the FDA for approval, and every time they said no. And I'm going to tell you why in a second. The first side effect that affects mainly women is yeast infection. It only occurs in 10 to 15% of women. It occurs at a higher rate if someone said, yeah, I've had a history of yeast infections my whole life. It's always been a hassle. Those women may have a higher rate when they start it. And what we do is we give them a prescription to treat that ahead of time. And usually it's not a big deal. Most women who go on these drugs love them, absolutely love them, because it helps control their blood sugar, helps reduce the bounce, and it helps to reduce weight. Now, what about diabetic ketoacidosis? This is where the FDA had a big issue. They said, well, even though the rate of causing ketoacidosis when people were on these meds is really, really low, the A1C drop isn't that much. They didn't pay attention to time and range. They just said the risk-benefit ratio just wasn't good. And that was the main reason why they turned it down. So when you take these drugs, typically the cause of DKA is not enough insulin. And when you don't have enough insulin, the blood sugar goes up. You get these ketones that build up because your body's trying to get energy. They break down the fat. And the fat are ketones, and it goes into your system, cause metabolic havoc. You really feel differently than just having a high blood sugar. You feel horrible. You get nausea, you vomit, you fatigue, malaise. You see the little pictures I got off the internet for you guys? But look at the lower left thing that I have on the slide. Normally, diabetic ketoacidosis is also associated with extremely high blood sugar levels. But these SGLT2 inhibitors commonly cause what we call euglycemic DKA. Euglycemic DKA means you could have ketoacidosis and be really sick, nausea, vomiting, breaking down the fat, causing these ketones to go up, and your blood sugar could be normal. You know why? Because the drug is working. It's pushing all the excess sugar out in your urine. And so the FDA said this could be dangerous because most people who have experienced DKA or they're not feeling good, they just check their blood sugar. And if their blood sugar is good, they say, couldn't be my diabetes. So these folks with euglycemic DKA need the same treatment as anybody in ketoacidosis, which is insulin, fluids, and close monitoring. So that's the key. And for a lot of the patients that are going on it, we tell them, listen, if you're not feeling good, please check your ketones. Now I have a picture of someone testing their ketones with a urine strip, but they now have ketone meters that are much more accurate. So that's important, that if you go on these drugs, you've been educated and you're aware. Okay, so here's the summary. GLP-1s are injectable. They decrease glucagon. They slow gastric emptying. They decrease your appetite. They lead to weight loss. They decrease your insulin needs. And nausea is common. SGLT2s, it's an oral once-a-day pill. They make you pee out excess glucose, lead to weight loss, decrease insulin. You could have a genital mycotic infection. Mycotic means like yeast. And DKA is possible. And DKA is a serious condition. And you can see the little sentence in red at the top. They're not approved by the FDA. You should know that 2 of these SGLT2 inhibitors are approved in Europe for the use in type 1. So other FDA equivalent organizations in Europe did approve these drugs. And as far as I know, they're not used very much because you have to be a specialized physician, but I have not heard of any adverse effects. So this is basically my second to last slide. Remember, your body will always need insulin. These medications go on top. And I didn't talk about Simlin. That's a topic of a whole nother lecture. You should download the TCOID book from the virtual health fair. It's free. I have a huge chapter on Simlin. I'm not going to spend any more time on that other than to say that they're making more formulations of it because they want to mix it with insulin. And Simlin is mimicking a natural hormone called amylin, which comes from the beta cell along with insulin. So you may see a comeback of that. And other drugs are being considered. Dr. Pettis, good old Jeremy, he's studying the glucagon receptor antagonists. You heard that beep? That means my time's up. And I think there will be another day for people with type 1 diabetes. So I'm going to finish with this slide. Don't forget to check out our video vault. It's brand new on our TCOID homepage where you can see all the lectures that we've had from our prior 5 virtual conferences, including the one conference. Tons of good information, great speakers. Enjoy the rest of the day.